right, Chief. How's things?
Doing well, thank you.
Mate, talk to me about what you do. It's fascinating and it's also such an unbelievable niche in the realm of jobs out there, right?
Yeah, totally. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm located in Los Angeles, California. I specialize in doing trauma work, so a lot of EMDR therapy, brain spotting, something called internal family system, parts work. So trauma work is my jam. I've been doing trauma work since 2016, I would say, when I started as an intern through the present, and I love it.
Why'd you start?
Why did I start? I've been through my own life experiences, and I had amazing therapists that I worked with personally.
Hmm.
And from there, I kind of decided I wanted to give back the same way that I felt like therapists supported me. And I was very attracted to the field for a while. I grew up as an only child, so I feel like I was always kind of exposed to a lot of adult conversations, and I was always a really good listener. So those were some of the reasons.
That's a really fascinating point, actually. Like most of the people I come across who are only kids can hold a more, let's say, mature conversation a little bit easier than other folks, right? Because they're surrounded by adults all the time. Like whether it's a single parent household, whether it's a dual parent household, whether it's friends, neighbors, or whatever, it's always like talking about real world shit, let's say, rather than Toys R Us. That's really interesting.
Yeah,
That's a fascinating observation.
yeah,
I'm
totally.
getting to it in real time. See, you're teaching me things
Hmm.
already. We've been talking for about 37 seconds,
Great.
mate. So day to day, EMDR, someone comes in, is it face to face? Is it via this weird thing called the internet? Like how do you start this off?
Well, specifically with EMDR, traditionally it was primarily in person. So client would come in to the office, we would get to know them, we would kind of understand who they are, what they're working with, what their trauma history was, and engage in some of the steps for EMDR. Since pandemic happened though, and in a lot of states we were in lockdown, a lot of us actually transitioned to doing EMDR over the internet virtually. So it can be done both ways, but I feel like every individual kind of has their own preferences. Now that there isn't the same lockdown like it was many years ago, a lot more people are coming back in person.
Do you feel like we're losing that personal touch, like relying on the crutch of technology a little too much?
With EMDR, or just do you mean in general?
Kind of in general. Yeah, in general.
Well, I would say at least what I notice, because I love both, I still offer both types of therapy. What I notice is that when I am with someone in person, I can feel a little bit of the energy a
Mm.
little bit more. I can feel like if there's nervousness, or I can kind of tune in a little bit more to what their body language is going on. It's not to say I can't do that virtually. Like virtually, I can still kind of feel out what's going on. But I would say it's a little bit harder, and I don't get to catch as much of the body language as I would in person.
Yeah, and that's a big part of our job, right? Working with people. It's this
Hmm.
weird little iffy diffy stuff in the air. You're like, hold on a minute, something's not quite right here. Like I can't quite put my finger on it. It might take us a while, and we might get it wrong, but something is not quite right. And it definitely makes you believe in something else. This thing is not binary. This thing that we call life is not binary. It's not yes or no. It's like, well, it's kind of there, kind of not. It's fascinating.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely.
Do you think more folks are experiencing more trauma? Do you think it's more prevalent in the modern age, let's call it, or do you think we're a little bit more aware?
You know, that's a tough question because I do, like, let's say since 2020, since pandemic year, as a both a person and as just as a therapist, I feel like I've aged like 20 years since then. And
Mm.
I think it's because, not only did I think collectively in the world we all went through so much during that time, but I do think the modern age, social media, all of that, it does expose us to a little bit more than I think in previous decades, in previous generations. There's something called vicarious trauma that I talk to a lot of my clients about. So if there's, these things are going on in real time right now, unfortunately, there's wars in other countries, there's political challenges going on, and we get that information in instants. We see all these visual images of it. And while we personally are not experiencing it, let's say, we're sheltered in our space, seeing those images can also be very traumatic. Seeing certain videos can be very traumatic for our nervous system. So, is there more trauma? I don't know. I feel like there's been a lot of trauma, in many cultural systems for a long time, but I do feel like as a society, we are getting more exposure to it, unfortunately.
We get desensitized to it too, right? Which is, it's funny. Like I was having that kind of conversation over Christmas time, of like media always plastering a negative to get an emotional response, so then it gets more clicks and all that type of stuff, right? You have to be first rather than right, as Denzel says. But we're talking about the first Gulf War, bit of a history geeks, but it was like that's pretty much the first global conflict that was like always televised. You wake up, you eat your cornflakes in the morning, and you're watching this thing over in the Middle East, and you're like, wait, hold on a minute. Like, yeah, first of all, we're not there on the ground level. We're not the ones getting surfed out of home, bombed, shot. So you have to take that with all the salt in the sea. However, you are watching it, and it kind of gets to the point of, is it our responsibility to stop watching it? But if you stop watching it, you have no idea what's going on. And is that better? Like, it's these questions where, to be honest, mate, I have no idea about the answer.
Yeah. It's such an existential question, I feel like, because I do I mean, I feel like I have to practice this for myself personally as well, because
Yeah.
I'm very sensitive to these images too, and just the issues that going on around the world. But even when I talk to my clients about it, some people, are so destabilized
Mm.
when they see certain things or when they read certain things. And if we're destabilized, we can't function, So I feel like there's a difference between being informed about what's going on versus like seeing the actual videos, seeing the actual images, and being destabilized and not being able to function in your day to day. So it's a hard question. I feel like it's such an existential thing.
Mm. How do we create that stability for ourselves?
Well, I think we have to know what we're sensitive to and what we're not sensitive to. And I can even give like such a basic example. I'm watching a show now with my husband on TV, and there's sometimes there are moments where there are some violent scenes, and I can't watch it. Like that's just my personal sensitivity. So I often like leave the room, or sometimes I'll just go on my phone and I tell my husband like, let me know when it's over because I can't be okay seeing certain things. So I feel like we just have to know what our sensitivities are. I feel like we have to know what our nervous system and our bodies can tolerate. And then, yeah, set some boundaries for ourselves.
1000%, right? Like it's like we're willing, or we know the outcome. We know what's going to happen to us. We know we're going to freak out. You might have nightmares. There's certain stuff that I don't want to watch. Like I cannot watch it. It'll freak me out. I'll start punching pillows in the night. Like it's like, no, I'm not going to do that to yourself. Like certain rooms, if there's some shady individuals in that room, probably don't have to walk through that door. Let's go try a different room. Like we don't need to know what happens on the other side of that door. Don't play the dice. And I think a lot of folk, I hate to use this term, but like to play the victim, right? Of like, this is going to happen to me, but I'm going to willingly do it anyway. It's like, no, no, you have autonomy over yourself. You don't have to expose yourself to that content or that, you know, movie or read that book or be with that person, whatever it is, right? It's like, no, 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 no. You have to change. Otherwise, you're not going to be in a very good spot afterwards. I'd be really interested to hear about the nervous system and how that's affected. Do you mind getting into that? Bearing in mind I am blonde, so small words.
Sure. Yeah. So I talk about the nervous system a lot as a trauma therapist. And so when I talk about the nervous system, there's the parasympathetic nervous system, and then there's the sympathetic nervous system. So when we are in our sympathetic nervous system, we essentially, let's say, are in real-time danger, or there's potentially maybe a perceived threat going on in that moment. So our nervous system moves into fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses to survive, essentially, either the real threat or the imagined threat.
Mm,
Then there's also the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's when we're kind of in that calm, more grounded, relaxed state where we feel better, we feel okay, our breathing is regulated. So we kind of shift into different aspects of our nervous system depending on what's going on, but also dependent on our life experiences. So if, let's say, you grew up in, you know, traumatic home, or, an example maybe would be like your parents fighting a lot and it was very challenging to be around that, you might be more so in the sympathetic nervous system, because that's just what your baseline is. That's what you're used to. So when I talk about things like complex PTSD, asking someone to be in a calm, grounded state, that's a big ask because of, let's say, a lot of trauma going on in their lives, they need to be in their sympathetic nervous system for survival.
it's really profound that you say that. Again, not so long ago, I'd have a lot of conversations with uh, lads of similar ilk from similar backgrounds, and it's you're trying to get into the workforce, you're trying to do whatever, pursue whatever, and usually it's coaching. Brush my shoulders with that and have those conversations, and it's like, okay, cool. Like, how are we going to help all the demographics of individuals, but then also like, how are you doing as an individual? And a lot of the time, you see little patterns of whether it's body language or whether it's verbal, and we trip each other up and be like, mate, you doing all right? It's like, oh, kind of. It's like, you look like you're stuck in a fight or flight.
Mm.
And it's like everything is a scrap. It doesn't matter what happens. You could come in with like armchairs and cuddles, and I'm thinking that you're going to start swinging punches at me. And it's random stuff like that. It's like, again, it poses the question, or, you look up and you find yourself looking in a mirror and you're like, it's actually really important you're in a good spot. Because otherwise you will
Mhm.
just scrap everybody physically, verbally, emotionally, whatever. And then the trauma just cycles, right? It continues and it passes on to the next person. And it's like this destructive pattern.
Sure, yeah. Knowing what our patterns are and looking at them from maybe a clearer lens is very powerful.
Mm. How do you go about that though? How do you go about having that conversation with yourself?
Well, with yourself, I mean, you may not think of it from, like, let's say, a nervous system lens, but like, I think everyone knows what anxiety is, or most people either know somebody anxious or at times experience themselves as anxious. Are we anxious all the time? Are you anxious all the time? Is it just in certain instances? So you want to sort of look at how you feel in different situations, how you feel on your own.
Mm.
And, anxiety, being in an anxious state, is an example of being in a sympathetic state in your nervous system, because you're in that, what we call hyperarousal, meaning heart's racing a little bit more. You're maybe a little bit more on hyper alert. You're a little bit more hyper vigilant in your day to day. So that's an example. So you don't maybe necessarily have to think about it from like a nervous system lens, but you can kind of think about it as, what is my general baseline? How do I feel within myself? How do I feel around my family? How do I feel about my friends? How do I feel in my relationship? How do I feel at work? And really go from there.
What are you trying to find
That's an interesting question. Can you elaborate on that?
in life? This whole thing. What are you trying to find?
Are you asking me personally what I'm trying to find, or just what I hear from
Yeah,
people?
yeah, for sure. You.
Well, to share, what am I trying to find? I am trying to personally find continually what my homeostasis is. I've come a long way just in my own life experiences and therapy work myself. And I want to experience a little bit more joy. I feel like I have such a serious job, and I come from my own mental health struggles in the past, and I need a little bit more joy. I need a little bit more lightheartedness. And I feel like we live in such a tough world. So that's really very much needed. And this is not really something I'm trying to find, but I have goals in life. I want to continue supporting people. I want to have a family one day. I want to experience new places, new people. So those are a lot of my personal desires.
Mm. I think we get stuck in this seriousness, right? Everything needs to be a straight arrow. Everything needs to be hardcore and hustle. And yeah, okay, I'm a big fan of working hard. Yeah, okay, cool. But that doesn't mean like the journey can't be fun. That there is joy and fun to be had in the everyday menial type shit. You can just have a laugh with somebody. And I think the art, honestly, mate, I think the art of talking shit is getting lost. Like I just, again, coaching, right? Just relating everything back to the day job, I guess. You see folks in front of you and they come in real stern from their job, personality is at an all-time low, and you're like, dude, like this doesn't have to be a chore, nor does going to work, nor does being a mother, nor does being a father or a friend, or you can have some fun whilst you're doing this. We can talk and back and forth and be a little bit, boisterous in a way. It's like that's okay. We're all just trying to have fun. It's like we watched on nature shows. You get a little lion cub that's like slapping the mother's ear or something, and then they just want to play around. It's like little kittens. We can do the same. We are just animals. We are humans, and I think we forget that, and it's definitely something that I
Mhm,
forget quite often.
mhm,
Yeah,
absolutely.
who'd have known talking shit was so important?
Yeah, so important. And just, you're right. Like, I feel like, and again, I do think it's good to be sensitive, but at the same time, I feel like it's hard to be a comedian these days,
Mm.
um, I hear what you're saying. I think it is important to try and tap into that lightheartedness again.
Yeah, there's always balance, right? And not saying go to town on a certain demographic. I was like, no, there's a line, guys. Let's maybe not cross that one. Um, but just having fun, man. Like, and even with
Hmm.
strangers as well, right? I feel like we're all in our own little bubble, and it's getting smaller and smaller, even though we're getting more and more connected. Even you and I, just flicking a message over email is like, okay, cool, now we're connected. But if we walk along the street, how many folks are going to stop and say hello to you or nod of the head or like even just acknowledge your existence? Like I kind of not play a game, but sometimes I walk down the street and I make a point of like looking at people. I acknowledge that
Hmm.
you're here, you're walking in the same direction, opposite direction, whatever it may be. And folks don't. They turn their
Hmm.
head, they look away, they look to the ground, they get the phone out, and they've probably not scrolled on anything. Just to avoid
Hmm.
acknowledging another human being. It is scary.
Hmm. It's scary, but I feel like my mind goes to they're kind of moving into survival. I feel like in that moment, maybe it's not comfortable or maybe it feels a little bit scary, to be seen or to be acknowledged by another individual. I feel like there's just always kind of that duality too.
How do we tackle that socially?
Well, I do think it starts with each individual themselves, and I can look back at my own experiences, and in that particular example that you've talked about, I was sort of that person that would like put my head down and not acknowledge people. At the time, for me at least, it just didn't feel comfortable. It didn't feel safe for me to do that. It wasn't until, like I mentioned here, I've done my own therapy and I also moved to a different state. And just the vibe and the culture was so different. Like
Mhm.
people were a lot more welcoming where I was, and there was that sort of community feeling. And so I feel like there are sort of clusters, places like that where it does feel more like a community, but I do think it starts within ourselves and understanding, hey, why was that weird for me to be acknowledged by the other person? Why did I put my head down? I think it should be like an internal reflection that we all have.
I think most folks are so stuck on autopilot that they rarely ask themselves these types of questions. They
Could
rarely
be.
think.
Hmm. Could be, yeah.
And maybe we do it too much. Maybe we're in the wrong as well. Like, who knows? But I often sit down with a coffee, just a coffee shop or at home or whatever, get the notebook out, get a little pen and paper, and drift off into a spot of like, how many people actually sit down and think just about anything? Because the world's so fast.
Hmm.
How often do we like get to sit down, stand up, something, walk around, but just let the mind think rather than sticking it with a music or podcast? Ironic because we're doing one now.
Yeah.
Whatever, just get rid of it. Take it out. Let your mind go where it wants. I think it's a way of self-cleaning in a way. Like we're all products of our environment. The first environment that we're in is ourselves, and then we get to move state. It's a brilliant example. A huge
Hmm.
fan of it. You've got to leave home. You have to. I think it's important
Hmm.
to the development of this character that we are. I think you have to do it. Go seek out different perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah. Get out of your bubble a little bit.
Get out of your bubble. Yeah, I think that's what the 20s all about.
Hmm.
Figuring out who you're not,
Hmm.
kind of
I
allowing
like
yourself
that.
to fuck up in a way. Sorry, I jumped in. My mind's going in
No,
a
it's,
million one directions here.
I love how you express that. I've never heard it being said, figuring out what you're not. I think that's really cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, yeah, I think we have a huge aversion to being wrong and to failing, right? And to not quite being perfect. I don't know about you, mate, but everything I've ever achieved, I've fucked up at least once beforehand. No, I never got something first time. I also think it's a blessing. Like you learn so much from it, and we like stories. We go to the cinema, we go to the pictures or a book or read a short story or something. And if it was just one sided and it just went, oh yeah, well, there was a lady, she lived happily ever after. She got everything she ever wanted. You'd be like, it's a shit story. I want my money back. That's all that we are. We're
Yeah.
just these individual stories intertwined, and one day we'll just be words on a paper, and that's great. Go out and figure it out, and usually that's a process of elimination, and that's just ticking off things that we're not.
Hmm. Hmm. You
Mm.
reflect a lot, so that's really wonderful.
Oh, I think I'm just a little crazy. That's why.
I would I would reframe that. I don't think you don't appear to me to be crazy. I just it seems that you've been through a lot of life experiences and you like to do a lot of reflection.
Yeah, Yeah, I definitely enjoy it because I see the benefits of it. Because the last thing you want to do is be asleep for 5 years and realize that you've made the same mistake every single day.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, that means a lot of people become collateral damage, and that is the last thing I want to do. Like me being unaware of something that I do and somebody else getting hurt keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
Like, so you gotta understand.
Yeah.
And then, someone's gonna let you know, hey, you fucked me off, like the way you did, whatever, right? We all make mistakes. Bloody hell. I piss off about 20 people a day. And that's okay. Hold your hands up, apologize. That's my bad. I'll take it on board. Just keep developing.
Yeah. Well, the fact that you think about it and you said that maybe it keeps you up at night, that kind of tells me that you have a lot of empathy.
Again, I think we have to, right? Because we work with people.
Hmm.
It's a blessing and a curse, that whole empathy thing. It really is. I think it gives you this bond that you can connect with other living things, not just humans, other living things, despite this communication. We can communicate with not even looking at each other. It's no longer body language. It's like we're in the same room and you're communicating because you can feel them.
Hmm.
And it's wonderful. It really is. And I think honestly think a lot of blokes try and hide it. I really do. And in the development years, they try and run away from it. And then they quote unquote harden themselves up, right? Where in fact they just make themselves cold.
Mm.
And it gets lost. It's something that's
Hmm.
learned, and it ends up getting lost. And I once read something that when you're born with the secrets of the universe, and you forget
Hmm.
them before you have a chance to communicate it to somebody else. And your entire life's purpose is to remember.
Yeah,
Perhaps it's true.
totally. Yeah.
So what's next? Where's this journey taking you? This life journey?
I'm honestly a big fan of taking things day by day. If I think about the next, you know, 30 years, I think that that personally overwhelms me. So I'm very much taking things on day by day. That feels, if we're going back to nervous system, that feels a lot better to my nervous system. Um, yeah, and just, continuing to do what I do. I feel like that's a big part of my purpose. So,
Mm. Do you feel
yeah,
fulfilled with what you do?
I really do. It's interesting being a therapist because I feel like people have so many different stages that they go through in life, and I get to kind of be with somebody if they choose to, of course, in a particular stage in their lives, and then clients move on and live their lives, and maybe they'll get back into therapy later or therapy with somebody else. And so I do think about, sometimes I think about like, how is so and so doing?
Mm.
I have thoughts like that. So it's an interesting experience where you're kind of working with someone in a particular season in their lives, and but then you don't know what happens later on unless they come back to working with you. And it doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes I get like updates, emails from former clients, and just they kind of tell me where they are and how they're doing. And I really appreciate that, because
Yeah.
I wonder, we care. So I forgot where I was going with this, but I think you asked me if I feel fulfilled, and I really do. I feel like I was sort of born and meant to be a psychotherapist in
Mm.
in one way or another.
Yeah, that reconnection is a really powerful thing, man. You know, Receiving those messages or emails or bring you to tears
Yeah,
sometimes.
it really does.
But you made
It
that
really
impact.
does. Yeah, and I actually I save those emails because sometimes clients may not have the best feedback for you, or they don't like to be challenged all the time. Like
Yeah.
that duality happens also. And so I get it, it's just part of the process in the field that I work in. And sometimes I go back to those emails or those letters that former clients sent me to just remind myself, okay, this is why I do what I do. And it's okay if people are mad at me. That's totally fine.
You're not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but you will be someone's whiskey.
Yeah. And like if that happens too, it just reminds me that, maybe I just touched on something that the individual wasn't ready to look at yet. So maybe that will be looked at in a different season of life, which is
Yeah.
fine.
Learning curve, right? Both sides.
Mhm.
Both sides learning curve. I
Yeah.
agree. Mate, I have three questions.
Okay.
What's the greatest piece of life advice you've ever received?
So for me personally, aside from doing the work that I do, I love to travel and I love to experience new places, new cultures, hear different languages, hear about different religions and different norms. And I think that's the best advice I've ever received actually from one of my cousins. Actually, she was just like, travel as much as you can, experience new people and new places. It's going to fulfill you, it's going to change you, it's going to surprise you. Don't worry about the money. You'll figure that out later, but just go and like we were talking about earlier, get out of your bubble
Mm,
sometimes.
100% agree. And you just got to jump, get that one-way ticket,
Yeah.
figure it out. You'll be all right.
Yeah.
What about the worst?
I've heard the advice go around sometimes of people saying like always say yes. And I understand, I guess, the reasoning behind it. I think what people mean is say yes to new opportunities and to new experiences. But I look back and I'm like, that is not, at least for me, that would not be good advice. Because I think back to certain life experiences where I've said yes to, where I totally should have said no.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes we need to say yes and sometimes we need to say no. So don't forget the art of saying no as well.
And don't be the people pleaser, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes it's not meant for you,
right.
and you're not letting them down. Like they can figure it out by themselves. And there's always going to be somebody else. Like it's just not meant for
Right.
you. Leave it alone.
Right. Yeah.
What are the three words you would tell your younger self, or four words?
Things will always work out, or things work out, is what I would say. I look back at just some of my younger years and even a lot of the young people that I work with now.
Mm.
I was just so worried about how are things going to fall into place? What am I going to do with my life? How am I going to get through this situation? And it's true, like things end up falling into place one way or another.
Yeah, I relate to that real heavily. I think as a younger individual, you're filled with so much worry, right? So much anxiety of what will happen, what will occur, like how, it's always about tomorrow or it's about in a year. It's like, man, you know what, man? You will end up getting through it all. You
Yeah,
will be all right. But sometimes you got to weather
totally.
that storm a little bit and you develop that emotional badge of armor. So you're like, you know what? I'm gonna protect that emotional energy. And maybe we do need to go through it at a younger age, so then we don't get nailed by it as adults, right? Like you need chickenpox as a kid, so you don't get shingles as an adult. I don't know. Maybe it
Mhm,
is.
mhm.
Maybe it
It's
is.
true. Yeah.
Mate, thank you so much for your time. And again, I apologize for being late.
No worries. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
It's an honor and a privilege, mate. Like talking to people that know so much, who do some incredible things. I learn a lot. Thank you so much. We'll speak soon.
Thank you.
You have a wonderful day.
You too.
See you later, mate. Bye, everybody.